I want to talk to you today about how in these United States, we're kind of obsessed with church size, aren't we? Big or small churches, well, we kind of focus and hone in on that. So, we're always saying, what's the biggest Baptist church, since we're Baptist, what's the biggest Baptist church in America? Well, there are bigger ones, but the biggest church that actually has Baptist in its name is Second Baptist Church in Houston, Texas. And get this, they worship on weekly average with 23,000 people. That's a lot. They have so many people, they have 6 different places they gather for worship, that one congregation. They have 6 different sites. That's a lot of people. It seems like a lot, but to some it might seem like peanuts when you compare it to Joel Osteen's church in Houston, Texas. Now, if you've talked to me at all about Joel Osteen and theology, you know I don't often support his theology. It's not biblically sound a lot of times. But say what you want about him, he can draw a crowd. You know how many people come to his church on a weekly basis on average? 43,500. That's more than 43 times the number of people who live in this town of East Brady. And they're all going to the same church. How do they do it? Well, their sanctuary auditorium holds 16,800 people. Get them all in and out in 3 services. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, it's so big. Their church building where they meet is 161,500 square feet. That's huge. To put that into perspective, the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol building, the one with the dome in D.C., it houses the U.S. Senate, the House of Representatives, and a lot of their offices. It is 175,000 square feet. So Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas is almost as big, their building is almost as big as the U.S. Capitol building. It's massive. Now compare that to some churches where they've got only maybe 5 people meeting together. People come together in an old, maybe rundown church building that used to host dozens or hundreds of people a week, and now they're just down to 5. The ministry's run its course. Or maybe just a handful of like-minded friends who get together in someone's living room once a week to worship. Churches. And there aren't many people there. And the places where they're meeting, they're not lavish, they're not fancy, they're not enormous. Now, when you look at these 2 types of churches, we can think, well, they don't really have anything in common. The types of people attending them, they're often different. The types of places they are found, often different. Budget, mission giving, staffing, completely different. But there's one important thing they have in common. No matter how many or how few people gather and call themselves a congregation, no matter how many or how big the buildings they are that they've constructed to worship, no matter where they are located, they are part of the Church of Jesus Christ. And as such, they are built by Jesus and only by Jesus. Jesus builds his church, and Jesus is the only one who builds his church. Now, in our human failure, sometimes we can think otherwise. We can think people build the church, right? We see a church that's growing because there's this charismatic leader there, and everyone loves him. Think of Joel Osteen, right? Everyone loves that guy, and the church is growing. He's building the church. Or a place where a group of people come together to do the hard work of the ministry. They're building the church. Or maybe in some cases we think people who are able to, and they give lots of money to build the most fantastic sorts of facilities, they're building the church. We think that, and we're wrong. That's not right. People don't build the church. I don't build the church. You don't build the church. No Christian person you know builds the church. Now that's not to say people, that's not to say we don't have a role in church growth, but we don't build the church. Jesus, and Jesus alone, builds his church. Let me explain to you why I say this. A few moments ago, I read to you from Matthew chapter 16. And this is where Jesus himself declares he's the one who builds his church. Let's walk through it a little bit. Jesus comes and he asks his disciples, who do people say I am? He says, well, you talk to people, guys. You hear what they're saying. What do they think about me? And the disciples, they've got some answers. They say, well, some people say you're John the Baptist. They get you confused. They think you're the same guy. And some of them said, well, some people say you're the prophet Elijah, you've come back. Because if you recall, Elijah was taken up to heaven in flames. He never actually died on this earth. Or they say, well, you're Jeremiah the prophet, you've come back. Or they say, well, you're a prophet, you're among the prophets. And those seem to be, answers that were floating around about Jesus. Because everyone, we know this, right? Everyone has an idea about who Jesus is. But that's not the important question. The important question isn't who do other people say Jesus is. Jesus looks at them and he says, who do you say that I am? And I don't know if the other disciples, they just stare at their dirty feet and sandals because they don't have an answer, or if it's just because Simon beats them to it. But Simon pipes up and he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. It's like he's saying, Jesus, you're the Messiah. You are the anointed one. You are the chosen one by God to come and save. You're the Son of God. You are God on this earth. That's Simon's testimony about Jesus right here. And at this point, Jesus, he kind of gives Simon some kudos. Can you imagine? I mean, just imagine Jesus standing right in front of you, looking at you as he puts his hands on your shoulders, and he says, good job. Why don't we all live for that? That's kind of what he does to Peter here. He says, Peter, or Simon, not Peter yet, but he says to Simon here, you are blessed, Simon, because you didn't think of this yourself. You didn't get this yourself. God in heaven has revealed this to you. So I'll tell you what, Simon, I'm going to rename you. I'm going to rename you Peter, which is why I messed up before, because most of us call him Peter, or we might refer to him as Simon Peter. We rarely refer to him as Simon. Simon Peter. Jesus renames him Peter. Peter, which in Greek means rock. And Sandy shows, and then this is when Jesus says this, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Jesus says, I will build my church. Nobody else is building my church. Jesus doesn't tell somebody else to go build his church. He says, it's my responsibility and mine alone to build a church. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesus alone builds the church. Jesus alone grows the church. Jesus alone forms congregations and calls people into them. And Jesus alone will transform the world around him into the kingdom of God through the church he is building. So Jesus, and Jesus alone is the builder. That is the main point of that sentence there. That's why I highlighted it for yellow for you there. Even so, even though that's the main point, there are other important parts of that statement. Jesus says, on this rock, I will build my church. On this rock, Jesus says, when I build my church, I'm going to build it on something. Right? He builds on this rock. Well, it kind of begs the question, though, doesn't it? What's this rock? Don't we want to? What do you mean by this rock, Jesus? Isn't that how we think? Let's say I'm told. I come to you and I say, I've been told to inform you that you have inherited a sum of money. And you say, oh, really? How much? And I say, oh, well, I have the sum written here on this piece of paper. And what do you do? What are you doing? You're like, what piece of paper? Show me, right? Because that's what you do. Jesus says, on this rock, I will build my church. And we say, Jesus, what rock? What are you telling me? What are you building on, Jesus? What are you referring to when you say you're going to build your church on this rock? And there are at least three different interpretations that theologians over the years have kind of brought forth for what Jesus means when he says this rock. He's going to build his church on this rock. I think the three main ones, they're valid in different ways. So I'm going to share them with you so we can see how they're valid. The first interpretation, what I think of as the immediate rock, is that Jesus is referring to Peter. Peter is the rock, because after all, didn't Jesus just get done naming Peter rock? So that makes sense. So people see Peter as being the rock on which Jesus says he's going to build his church. And Jesus did build his church on Peter, the immediate church, the early church. Peter, the first of those gathered at this gathering we're talking about here today, he was the first to see the resurrected Jesus Christ. Peter, who was the one who stood up and gave that sermon on the first Christian Pentecost that led to 3,000 people committing their life to Jesus Christ. Peter, the one who led and suffered for that infant congregation as it grew up in Jerusalem. Peter, the first to understand from God and declare that the good news of Jesus Christ, not just for the Jews, but for the whole world. We see Paul, the Apostle Paul, going out and doing the heavy lifting on that, taking the message to everyone. But Peter is the first one that is revealed to from Jesus. And aren't we glad he did? because we're not Jews. We're the rest of the world, and we come to faith in him by what was done from that. So Peter was the rock on which Jesus built the early or the immediate church. That's the first interpretation. Now, the second interpretation of the rock, what I think of as the foundational rock, is that Jesus is the rock. The rock is the truth in Peter's statement. Peter saying, Jesus, you're the Messiah. Jesus, you're the Son of God. Jesus says, that truth right there. It's me, and that's the rock I'm going to build my church on. Sadly, there are many congregations in this world that aren't part of this true church that Jesus is building because they are not built on the truth that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Messiah. Sure, somewhere out there in their thoughts that might be there, but they're concerned about other things. They're concerned not about the mission of Jesus in the world or what Jesus says, but they're concerned about, I don't know. And so they're like social clubs. Sometimes they're exclusive social clubs, right? You've heard of churches where if you're in the right family, if you have the right job, if you live in the right part of the community, you can come worship here. Or if you have enough money, or you give enough money, or you've stuck around and done enough jobs in the congregation, well, you can be a member here and you can get the special privileges. You get to say what's going on here. They don't care about the work and word of Jesus Christ. They care about themselves. What makes them happy and comfortable? See, these types of churches, they're not the church of Jesus Christ because they're not built on the rock that Jesus is the Son of God, whom we obey and follow. You don't have the church if you're not built on this truth. Second interpretation. Now the third interpretation, which kind of brings us really to what we're getting to today, is that when Jesus talks about this rock, the rock is the testimony. The testimony. Jesus builds his church on the testimony of those who have put their faith in him. So first he builds it on Peter, because Peter is the first there to give this testimony. But then throughout the ages, Jesus has continued to build his church on the testimony of everyone who follows after him. Because, Peter's long gone, but Jesus continues to build his church, doesn't he? This is how Jesus does it. He builds it on the testimony of those who live from generation to generation. Guess what that means? That's me, and that's you. If you have made a profession of faith in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sins, for the promise of eternal life, for peace with God, then you have this testimony on which Jesus desires to build his church. Jesus' intent is to keep building his church on that rock, your testimony. That's how Jesus continues to build the church, through my testimony and yours. And what a church it is. Look at what Jesus says here about this church that he's building. He says, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. The gates of Hades, the gates of hell, that's Satan's dominion. That's the devil's dominion. Jesus is saying here, the church he is building will overcome the dominion of the devil. The church he's building will survive any onslaught brought against it by the enemy. It's going to survive. That's the truth. That's the promise in Jesus' words right here. Now, we read that, and yet we look around at our situation, and it seems like the gates of Hades are wide open all around us, ready to swallow us. We had someone make the prayer request about our society, right? We have people who are fighting in our culture vehemently for the right to continue murdering innocent unborn children. We have drugs in every neighborhood, every street, every family. We have children who are abused or neglected. We have elderly who are abused and neglected. Do you know that in 2014, over 1,500 children in the United States died of neglect? In the United States, 1 out of every 10 people 60 or older has experienced elder abuse. Maybe as many as 5 million cases per year. That's the world we live in. People cheating, they're lying, they're stealing, and they're proud of it. They brag about it. Our interactions are fueled by hate, gossip, assumption, which you just take a look at what's happened in our country over the past 2 weeks, 3 months. You see that. Law enforcement officers being killed in the line of duty, innocent people being killed by law enforcement. It's a mess. And we look around at all this and we say, it looks like the gates of hell are on fire all around us. But Jesus says the gates of Hades aren't going to overcome the church. What's going on? How did we get here? How we got here, in part, is because so many people in the church aren't fully willing to let Jesus build his church on their testimony. Letting Jesus build his church through our testimony means we've got to give some things up, don't we? We've got to give up some of our time. Serving the church, serving Jesus' mission throughout the world, to serve other people. And we all have things we'd much rather be doing with our time. It means we have to give of our abilities, our giftings, maybe our talents that God has given us. And he gives them to us to build his church. And well, we'd much rather use them to glorify ourselves or to satisfy our own desires. We might have to give up some of our resources, some of our money to the local congregation so that our testimony can be seen to the world. And Christ might build his church on that. See all those things? That's part of us giving and allowing Jesus to use our testimony to build his church. But it's too much. I don't want to give any of that. And guess what? Jesus isn't forcibly going to take it from you. So you know what happens? Jesus stops building his church through our testimony. And there's a consequence to that. We see it. The gates of hell open wider and wider all around us. We look around, we say, why is it happening? Jesus promises that the church will prevail against it. That's a truth. But in the meantime, the devil does a lot of damage. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the one that prevents Jesus from building his church. I don't want to do that. Jesus desires to build his church on the rock of my testimony and on yours. The question is, will we let him? We all want to see the church built. Are we going to let him build it on us? Will we release our time and our giftings and our resources as our testimony to him, to his local congregation, so that Jesus can be out there building his church all around us, so that the gates of hell might be closed a little bit more tightly? What in your life have you been holding back? Saying, no, Jesus can't have that. That's for me. That's mine. Your time, your abilities, your resources. Jesus says, give me your time. Give me your resources. Give me those abilities. And we say, no, I'm keeping that. That's us holding back our testimony. Like Peter, Jesus desires to build his church on our testimony. We saw how he did it in Peter. He desires to build his church through you. Isn't that amazing? When hell rages all around us, it's often because so many refuse to let Jesus build his church in and on and through us. We have other things on our agenda. Today, as we talk about the future of East Brady Baptist Church, you be that person that says, take it all, Jesus. You need some of my time, take it, I give it to you. I see how I can be spending my time for you. You need some of my abilities, Father, to get some things done that other people can't do, but I can. Jesus, take it. You need some of my resources. You need some of my money, God. Take it all, and build your church around me. Release your life to the power of your testimony and watch as Jesus builds his church all around us. Let's pray.